She was already nervous. A blind date at a fancy restaurant, feeling like she didn't belong. But then, she sat down with the wrong man. The mix-up was awkward, the embarrassment worse. And just when she thought things couldn't get worse, he might actually be interested. But what if it's all a game? The evening air felt cooler than usual as Emma stepped into the elegant restaurant, her nerves dancing wildly in her chest. The soft hum of conversation, the clink of silverware, and the warm golden lighting created an atmosphere that screamed luxury, something she was never quite at ease with. She had always been a girl of simplicity, someone who found comfort in the little things, not the polished world of high-end dining. The only reason she had agreed to this blind date was because Jenny, her best friend, had pushed her into it, claiming that it would be good for her to step out of her comfort zone and experience something new. Emma had reluctantly agreed, though part of her resented the pressure. She knew she would have rather spent the evening dressed in a modest second-hand dress, her shoes worn from countless shifts at the diner. Emma couldn't shake the feeling that she didn't belong here. This place was for people who knew how to navigate social circles, who knew the right things to say and the right way to act. People like her, those who worked to pay the bills, who lived paycheck to paycheck, didn't belong in these circles. But she had promised Jenny, so she had pushed her reservations aside and walked into the restaurant, hoping that she could somehow blend in and get through the evening without too much discomfort. Her eyes scanned the tables looking for someone who resembled the man she had been told to meet. She couldn't help but feel a pang of doubt. What would this man be like? Would he be kind? Or would he be like the others she had met? Those who were only interested in appearances and wealth, who never cared to get to know the real her. Her heart began to race as she thought about the possibility of the evening turning into another disappointing experience. But then, her gaze landed on him, a man sitting alone at a table near the back, his dark hair neatly styled, wearing a sharp suit. He was engrossed in his phone, seemingly unaware of her approach. There was something about him that struck her immediately, something calm and collected, an air of confidence that was both intimidating and intriguing. Emma's stomach fluttered. Could this be him? She had to approach him. Steeling herself, she walked over to his table, trying to muster a smile, though her nerves were practically making her stomach churn. "Hi, you must be Kevin. I'm Emma," she said, her voice shaking slightly despite her best efforts to sound confident. The man looked up, startled at first, blinking in confusion. His eyes narrowed for a moment, as if he was trying to figure out if she was speaking to him. Hi, he said, clearly caught off guard. "I'm not Kevin. I think you've mistaken me for someone else." A wave of embarrassment washed over Emma as she realized her mistake. Her face flushed red and she quickly began to apologize. "Oh my God, I'm so sorry," she stammered, her voice barely above a whisper. "I thought you were my date. I can't believe I just..." Before she could finish her apology, the man, who had an expression of mild amusement, smiled softly and shook his head. "It's okay, really. You're not the first person to mistake me for someone else. It's not a big deal." He paused, then added with a chuckle, "I'm Ben Hunter, and I think you've already made my night a little more interesting by showing up." The lightness in his voice, his genuine warmth, caught Emma off guard. She had expected a more uncomfortable reaction, something dismissive, but instead he seemed unfazed. He even gestured toward the chair across from him. "If you want, you can sit down. I could use some company, even if it's not who I was expecting." Emma hesitated. She was mortified at having made such a mistake, but there was something in Ben's manner that made her feel at ease, something she couldn't quite put her finger on. Against her better judgment, she slid into the chair across from him, still feeling the weight of the awkwardness, but deciding to go with it. What harm could there be in having a conversation with a stranger after all? "I'm really sorry about this," she said again, her voice soft. "I shouldn't have just sat down without double-checking. I'm sure this happens all the time, right?" Ben gave a small laugh, his eyes kind and understanding. "Not exactly all the time, but I can't say it's never happened before. Don't worry about it. This is definitely a first for me, though, having someone sit down without even asking for permission." His smile widened. "But I'm not complaining." Emma chuckled nervously, trying to shift the conversation to something lighter. "Well, now that I've made a fool of myself, I guess I should tell you a little about myself, huh?" "Please, do," Ben said, clearly enjoying her light-hearted approach. "I'm all ears." For the next few minutes, Emma talked, her words flowing more easily than she expected. She explained how she worked as a waitress, how she loved art but struggled to find the time and money to pursue it. She talked about her hopes and dreams, her fears of never being able to make a living from her art, and how she had always dreamed of opening a small studio one day. As she spoke, she saw Ben's expression shift, no longer a man simply being polite, but someone truly listening. He seemed interested, genuinely so, in what she had to say. "I'm not exactly living the high life," she said with a laugh, "but I get by. That's something, right?" Ben looked at her, a thoughtful expression on his face. "More than something," he said. "It's impressive. A lot of people would just give up when things get tough, but you're pushing forward. That's not easy to do." Emma wasn't used to hearing such praise, especially from someone who seemed so far removed from her world. She had always been the one to support her friends and family, never expecting much for herself. She'd always thought that her dreams of opening an art studio would remain just that, dreams. "You really think so?" she asked, surprised. "I do," Ben said, his voice sincere. "I think people like you, who keep going no matter what, have something that a lot of people can't grasp. It's not about money or success. It's about staying true to yourself. I admire that." Her heart fluttered at his words. Was this real? Could someone who had so much to offer, the world, wealth, influence, actually be admiring her? Someone who had so little in comparison. For a moment, Emma allowed herself to relax. She stopped worrying about what she looked like or how she came across. She was simply talking to Ben, and he was listening. Really listening. She started to feel like maybe she didn't need to be perfect. Maybe she didn't need to fit into some imagined mold to be worthy of a genuine connection. But as they continued their conversation, the feeling of comfort began to shift. Something was off, though she couldn't pinpoint what it was. She wasn't entirely sure who this person was, who he really was. And despite the warmth between them, there was a part of her that couldn't fully let her guard down. Just then her phone buzzed. It was a message from Jenny. "Hey, I think I found Kevin. He's waiting for you at the bar. Should I tell him you're running late?" The sudden realization hit her like a wave. She had made a huge mistake. The man she had been talking to was not Kevin. Not at all. Her heart sank as she processed the embarrassing truth. She had been sitting with the wrong person all along. She looked up at Ben, her face burning with embarrassment. "Oh my God, I'm so sorry," she muttered, standing up quickly. "I thought you were someone else. I really need to go. I'm so sorry." Ben looked at her for a moment, confusion flickering in his eyes. He stood up as well, reaching out as if to stop her, but Emma was already grabbing her coat, her heart pounding in her chest. "It's okay," Ben said quietly, his voice soft. "It's really no problem. I understand." But Emma was already out the door, unable to face him any longer. She had made a fool of herself, and the embarrassment weighed heavily on her chest as she hurried through the streets of the city. But as she walked away, she couldn't shake the feeling that maybe, just maybe, there had been something more there than a simple mix-up, something real. After that awkward mix-up, Emily found herself in a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. She had left the cafe feeling embarrassed and confused, her mind racing with thoughts about the man she had just spent the past hour talking to, Ben. The moment she realized that he wasn't the person she had come to meet, she had rushed out, off there in a flurry, her heart pounding in her chest. But now, alone in her apartment later that evening, the heat of the moment had begun to fade, and all she could do was reflect on their conversation. She had been so sure of herself when she walked into that restaurant. The nerves were inevitable, but she had done her best to put them aside. It wasn't her first blind date, but it was certainly the first time she'd ever sat down at the wrong table. Yet what caught her completely off guard was the ease with which she had talked to Ben. There was something about him, something familiar in the way he spoke, the way he listened, and the way he made her feel like she mattered. She had shared parts of herself with him that she never usually revealed to anyone, not because she had to, but because he made it feel safe to do so. He wasn't like the others she had met, those who only seemed interested in the surface level. Details of her life. Ben had asked questions not out of obligation, but out of genuine curiosity. He wanted to know what made her tick, what her dreams were, and what motivated her. That was different. And despite the embarrassing mistake of thinking he was someone else, the sincerity in his responses had made her feel heard and valued, something she hadn't expected to feel, especially not on a blind date that she had originally agreed to with little enthusiasm. But now she couldn't help but feel a sense of betrayal too. What if all of it had been part of a facade? What If he had been pretending to be someone else just for fun, or maybe to test her reactions. Sure, he had seemed kind and interested, but what did he want from her? Was it a game to him? A momentary distraction from his real life, full of riches and privilege? She didn't belong in that world, and she knew it. Ben had been charming, but what did that really mean in the grand scheme of things? She had spent too much time in situations where everything was about appearance and superficial connections. Could Ben be different, or was he just another man who had something to prove, who only saw her through the lens of curiosity because she wasn't like everyone else in his world? The confusion gnawed at her as she sat on her couch scrolling through her phone, trying to distract herself. And then there it was, the message from Ben. It wasn't a message full of excuses or trying to backpedal, but a simple, sincere invitation. Hey Emily, I know we didn't exactly meet in the best way last night, but I wanted to reach out. I had a great conversation with you, and I'd really like to see you again. Would you be interested in grabbing coffee sometime? Emily stared at the screen, her fingers trembling as they hovered over the keys. She didn't know what to feel. Was this an opportunity to give him a chance to redeem himself? Or was this just another instance of a man wanting something from her, a quick connection, a fleeting moment of companionship? He had been upfront, at least in some ways, by admitting the mix-up. He hadn't tried to cover it up, but the nagging question remained. Why had he lied about who he was in the first place? The part of her that still felt the warmth of their conversation, the part that still remembered his smile, wanted to say yes. She wanted to believe that the connection they shared was real, that it wasn't just a fluke. But the part of her that had been hurt before, the part that knew how things like this usually turned out, hesitated. She knew all too well that the truth often came with consequences, and the risk of letting someone in, especially someone who had already lied, was overwhelming. She tried to put her feelings into perspective. What if Ben had simply been a man trying to live a normal life, who had felt trapped by the expectations of his wealth and status? Maybe that was why he had been so honest in the way he spoke to her, because for once, someone wasn't seeing him as just another wealthy businessman, but as a person with flaws and dreams of his own. The thought intrigued her, but the fear of being hurt again made it difficult to open up. Emily sat there for what felt like an eternity, staring at the phone in her hands. She thought about her life, how every day felt like a battle between being true to herself and trying to keep up with the demands of the world around her. She had spent so much time building walls around her heart, keeping herself safe from the potential heartbreak that often followed moments of hope. Was it worth it? Was she willing to tear down those walls for a chance at something real, something that might not be perfect but could be meaningful? Her heart told her one thing, but her mind screamed caution. She had never been one to let her guard down easily, especially not with someone who could easily walk away from her life. But Ben had looked at her with such openness, and despite the lies, there was a part of her that didn't want to shut him out without giving him a chance to explain himself fully. After a deep breath, Emily typed a message back. Hi Ben, thanks for reaching out. Honestly, I wasn't sure if I'd hear from you again. Coffee sounds nice. I'm free tomorrow afternoon, if that works for you. As soon as she sent the message, a sense of both relief and anxiety washed over her. She had made the decision, but now there was the uncertainty of what the next step would bring. Was this the right choice? She couldn't be sure, but deep down she knew she had to face the truth about who Ben really was, about who he was outside the veneer of his wealth and status. If she didn't, she would never know whether what they shared was genuine or just an illusion created by the circumstances of their meeting. The next day came quickly, and Emily found herself standing at the cafe again, trying to steady her nerves. She had convinced herself to just be open, to go into this meeting with the intent to listen, to see if Ben's intentions were truly as sincere as he seemed. But as she stepped inside, her heart skipped a beat when she saw him. He was sitting at the same table as the last time, his back straight, looking as if he belonged in this world of well-dressed professionals and carefully curated lives. He looked up as she approached, and for a moment the world seemed to fall away. Hey, he said, his voice warm but with a hint of nervousness. I'm really glad you came. I'm glad you asked, Emily replied softly, sitting down, across from him. There was so much she wanted to say, but the words didn't come easily. She simply watched him, waiting for him to speak first. For a moment neither of them spoke. It was as if they were both trying to figure out how to navigate the space between them unsure of what had been lost and what could still be salvaged. Finally, Ben broke the silence. "I owe you an apology, Emily," he said, his tone sincere. "I should have told you the truth from the beginning. I didn't want to risk losing you before I had a chance to know you, but I see now how wrong that was. I never meant to hurt you." Emily's heart softened. It wasn't the apology that mattered most, but the genuine remorse in his voice. She realized that for all his wealth, for all his status, Ben was just a person who had made a mistake just like anyone else. And maybe, just maybe, this moment was worth giving a second chance. "I don't know if I can just forget what happened," she said quietly, her eyes meeting his. "But I'm willing to try. I want to see where this can go. No more games, okay?" Ben smiled, his eyes lighting up with relief. "No more games, I promise." And just like that, Emily took the first step toward trusting again, toward opening her heart to the possibility that not all connections were built on superficiality and lies. With Ben, maybe, just maybe, there was a chance for something real. After the tension of their initial meeting and the unsettling mix-up, Emily found herself caught between doubt and longing. The uncertainty of who Ben truly was lingered, but so did the undeniable connection they had shared. It was clear that Ben had been genuine in his demeanor, kind in the way he listened, and sincerely interested in who she was, not just as a woman sitting across from him, but as someone with dreams, struggles, and a story to tell. Despite the mistake that had brought them together, there was something undeniably real in the way he had engaged with her. Emily, however, was no stranger to disappointment. Her life had been built on managing expectations and safeguarding her heart from the letdowns that always seemed to follow the moments of hope she allowed herself to experience. She had spent years perfecting the art of self-sufficiency, learning to trust her instincts and, above all, protect herself. She knew the sting of trusting someone only to find out they had been lying, concealing parts of themselves, or worse, seeing her as a means to an end. Ben, as far as she was concerned, could have been another person in that long line of men who only saw her through a lens of convenience. What was his true intention? Why would someone like him, with so much at his disposal, be interested in someone like her? She was just a waitress, someone who spent her days serving others in a cafe, unsure if her art would ever be more than a hobby. She struggled to reconcile the man she had spoken to with the version of him she had seen in the article, the version that belonged to a world so far removed from her own. Ben's wealth, his social circles, and the glossy image he projected through the media, those were things Emily had no real connection to. They were like shiny objects she could admire from afar but never touch. And yet, the person she had met, the one who had listened to her talk about her day, who had genuinely laughed at her stories, and who had spoken with such warmth, was someone who felt far more grounded than the superficial world she had imagined for him. And so Emily wrestled with herself. Was it possible that Ben was just like everyone else? Someone who could hide behind his wealth, who could pretend to be someone he wasn't to get what he wanted? Or was there a part of him that truly saw her, not as a waitress or someone who struggled to make ends meet, but as a person worthy of a deeper connection? Days passed, and Emily's thoughts circled around these questions. When she wasn't thinking about work, she found herself thinking about Ben, his smile, the way he looked at her as though she was the only person in the room. And yet, despite her growing feelings for him, she couldn't shake the fear that this was all too good to be true. What if she let her guard down only to find that once again she had been fooled? One evening, after a particularly long shift, at the cafe, Emily found herself sitting at her small kitchen table staring at her phone. There it was, a message from Ben. The anxiety she had been carrying in her chest all week resurfaced, but she found herself unable to ignore it. She took a deep breath and opened the message. "Hi, Emily. I've been thinking about our last conversation. I'd love to see you again. How about coffee tomorrow?" She stared at the words, unsure of what to feel. Was this just him trying to make amends for the confusion, or was it something more? The vulnerability in his invitation made her pause. It wasn't flashy. It wasn't grandiose. It was simple. A request to meet again, to have another conversation. No pretense, no promises, just the desire for more. Emily hesitated, her mind racing with the possibilities, each one pulling her in a different direction. If she agreed, if she took this step, would it lead to another painful disappointment? Would Ben reveal himself as someone completely different from the man she had felt connected to just days earlier? Or could this be the opportunity for something real? A chance to find out if they could truly understand each other outside the mistakes of their first meeting. She thought about the way Ben had made her feel, how he had been there without judgment, how his presence had felt so comfortable, even in the most awkward of circumstances. But she also thought about the man he had revealed himself to be in. That article. The man who had wealth, status, and influence. A man who could have anyone do anything without consequence. She was afraid of getting hurt, afraid that despite everything, she was still standing at the edge of something she wasn't sure she could trust. And yet there was a pull, a quiet desire to know him better, to understand why he had reached out to her. Was it just curiosity? Or had their connection meant something more to him too? With a deep breath, she tapped out her response. I'd like that. Coffee tomorrow sounds good. The message sent and Emily placed her phone down, her heart racing. It wasn't that she had made a decision. Not yet. But she had opened the door to something that could either be her greatest leap of faith or her biggest mistake. It was too soon to know which, but it felt like something worth exploring. The next day, when she arrived, at the cafe she found Ben waiting for her as expected. He was dressed casually, in jeans and a simple jacket, a far cry from the polished businessman she had read about. It was in that moment, as she saw him standing there with a soft, welcoming smile on his face, that she felt a shift inside her. This wasn't the man from the headlines. This was the man who had been kind enough to meet her where she was, awkward, unsure, but willing to be honest. Hey, she said as she approached, her voice softer than usual, her nerves still there but not as overwhelming as before. Hey, he responded, his smile widening. I'm really glad you came. I wasn't sure if you'd want to after, the confusion the other day. Yeah, Emily said, her smile wavering. I had a bit of a freak-out moment, to be honest. I wasn't sure what to make of it all. Ben nodded, his eyes softening. I get that. I didn't mean for any of it to come across as misleading. I like talking to you. I wanted to see you again. That honesty, so simple and raw, disarmed Emily. She had expected excuses, reasons why things had happened the way they did. But what she got instead was straightforward vulnerability. And in that moment, it hit her. Maybe this was the beginning of something real. Not because they had to fit into each other's worlds perfectly, but because they had been willing to show up and try. As they sat and talked, the conversation flowed effortlessly. There was no pretense, no walls between them. Just two people navigating the messiness of life, finding common ground in their differences and similarities. Emily told Ben about her art, her mother, and the difficulties she faced balancing work, and her passion. Ben shared his own struggles, not with the image of success that everyone saw, but with his need to find meaning beyond his wealth and career. The connection they had sparked on that awkward night seemed to blossom even further, without the weight of lies or expectations. By the end of their coffee, Emily knew she wasn't entirely free from the fear that had gripped her at the start. But she also knew that there was something worth exploring. She had learned long ago that things weren't always as simple as they appeared. Sometimes trust took time, but there was hope, and with hope came the possibility of something deeper, something lasting. She looked at Ben, a small smile playing at the corners of her lips. So, what happens next? Ben leaned forward slightly, his gaze steady. We take it one step at a time, Emily. No rush, just us. And in that moment, Emily realized that the risk wasn't in trying. The risk was in never giving herself the chance to see where this connection could go. She was ready to take the step. Ready to see where this road could lead. And for the first time in a long while, it felt like the beginning of something real. As time passed, Emily found herself growing increasingly uncertain about what she truly wanted from her connection with Ben. At first, it had been about simple curiosity, the thrill of meeting someone new in a world that seemed so distant from her own. But now, the feelings had grown more complicated. Each encounter with Ben left her with a swirl of emotions that she struggled to untangle. There was no denying the chemistry between them, the way their conversations flowed, the comfort they found in each other's presence, the way Ben made her feel seen, even in her most vulnerable moments. But beneath the surface of all that, there was a lingering doubt. Could she trust him? Could she trust herself? For so long, Emily had built her life around self-reliance. She had always been the one to shoulder her burdens, to keep her heart guarded, to protect herself from the possibility of disappointment. She knew what it was like to have expectations dashed, to feel as though you had invested time and energy into something only to have it slip through your fingers. And yet with Ben, something about him felt different. He didn't treat her like the others. He didn't look at her with the same judgment or impatience that many others had. He was kind, thoughtful, and at times utterly charming. But charm wasn't enough to erase the skepticism that lingered in her heart. She had been fooled before. The last time she had let herself believe in someone, she had ended up feeling like an afterthought, a fleeting presence in someone else's life. Ben's wealth, his success, and the world he moved in were so far removed from her own experience. He was a man who could afford anything, who lived a life most people only dreamed of. She, on the other hand, was just trying to make it through each day, struggling to pay rent, working long shifts at the diner, and constantly fighting the feeling that her dreams of becoming a full-time artist would never come true. The disparity between their worlds was glaring, and she couldn't help but wonder if that would always be a barrier. And yet, as much as she wanted to keep her distance, as much as her head told her to protect her heart, Emily couldn't help but be drawn to him. There was something in the way he listened to her, the way he didn't try to impress her with his money or his social status. He didn't treat her like a project or a stepping stone. He simply treated her like a person. That was what made it so hard to let go. The more she got to know him, the more she realized that he too was just trying to find something real. Beneath the polished exterior, Ben had his own struggles, his own doubts, and his own fears. The way he spoke about his work, the way he struggled with his place in the world, made Emily realize that maybe he wasn't so different from her after all. It was one evening, after another pleasant meeting at a local cafe, when Emily began to feel the weight of her indecision more acutely. Ben had been his usual self, warm, open, and genuinely interested in her life. They talked about everything from her art to his experiences in the tech world, but as their conversation deepened, Emily's own insecurities began to surface. She felt torn between her growing feelings for him and the fear that she was making herself vulnerable to someone who in the end might not be able to offer her the kind of stability she longed for. As they sipped their coffee, Ben looked at her with a quiet intensity, his gaze lingering on her face as if he was trying to read her thoughts. "Emily, I don't know if I've ever told you this, but I really enjoy our time together," he said softly. "I like how easy it is to talk to you. It's rare for me, you know." Emily's heart fluttered at his words, but she quickly pushed the feeling away. She knew she couldn't let herself get carried away by his compliments, not when she was still unsure about his intentions. "I enjoy it too, Ben," she replied, her voice steady but guarded. "But I can't help but wonder, what is it you're really looking for?" Ben's expression shifted, his smile fading slightly as he leaned back in his chair. It was clear that her question had caught him off guard. He seemed to take a moment before responding, as though carefully choosing his words. "What am I looking for?" he repeated softly. "I guess I'm looking for something real, something genuine, something that isn't based on what I can give or what I have." The honesty in his words caused a ripple of emotion in Emily's chest. She had heard similar things from men before, things that sounded good in theory but never seemed to hold up when tested. But Ben didn't sound like he was just saying the right thing. He sounded vulnerable, almost uncertain. For a moment, Emily wondered if he too was afraid of the very same things she was, afraid of giving too much of himself, afraid of being hurt. "You've got a lot to offer," Emily said softly, her eyes meeting his. "You've got your career, your success, everything. And I don't want to be someone who's just taking from that. I don't want to feel like I'm not enough because I can't give you the same things. I'm just me. And I don't want to get caught up in something that's going to fall apart because we come from two different worlds." Ben reached across the table, his hand hovering near hers before gently taking it in his. His touch was warm, reassuring. "Emily, I don't want you to feel like you're not enough," he said, his voice sincere. "You are more than enough. And I'm not asking you to give me anything that isn't already yours. I don't need you to change or to be someone you're not. All I need is for you to be real with me." The simplicity of his words hit Emily harder than she expected. Here was this man, who had the world at his feet, who had everything most people would envy, and yet he was telling her that all he wanted was her, authentically, unapologetically. For the first time, she felt the walls she had built around herself start to crack. She had spent so long hiding behind her fears, convincing herself that love and vulnerability were things she couldn't afford. But now, standing in front of Ben, she wondered if maybe it was time to let go of those fears. Maybe love didn't need to come with grand gestures or promises of security. Maybe it was simply about showing up for each other, about being open and honest no matter how uncertain things might seem. "I don't know if I'm ready for everything that might come with this," Emily admitted, her voice quiet but steady. "But I do know that I don't want to let this go. I don't want to lose you just because I'm scared." Ben smiled, his eyes softening as he squeezed her hand gently. "We'll take it one step at a time, Emily. No rush, no pressure. Just us. Just you and me. Figuring things out together." And in that moment, Emily realized that love wasn't about being perfect. It wasn't about having everything figured out. It was about showing up, being present, and allowing yourself to be vulnerable with someone who valued you for who you truly were. For the first time in a long time, Emily felt like she wasn't just someone living in the shadows of her own life. She was someone who mattered. Someone worth taking a chance on. As the evening wore on, the conversation continued to flow with ease, the earlier doubts now replaced with a sense of calm. Emily had no idea what the future held, but for the first time in a long while, she felt a sense of peace. She was no longer afraid of what might come next, because for once she was ready to embrace the possibility of something real, something that wasn't about what she could give or what she didn't have, but about two people being brave enough to take a step forward, together. And that in itself was enough. As time went on, Emily began to realize that the moment she had once feared was now upon her. The vulnerability she had so carefully shielded herself from had started to creep in, and in doing so, it had forced her to confront the truth about her feelings for Ben. She had spent so long keeping her heart guarded, telling herself that it was safer to protect herself from the potential hurt that always seemed to come with trusting others. But the connection with Ben had started to chip away at that protective layer, and what was left was a rawness that felt both unfamiliar and terrifying. At first, Emily had convinced herself that she wasn't like other people who would give in to the allure of someone who seemed so perfect, so seemingly beyond reach. She was a realist, grounded in her own experiences and her own struggles. She had a job that barely paid the bills, dreams that seemed far out of reach, and a world that often felt too small for the ambitions she held inside her. But when it came to Ben, everything about him seemed to break the boundaries of what she had set for herself. He was kind, attentive, and most importantly, he saw her, really saw her, for who she was, not just for what she had or didn't have. And that scared her more than anything. The more time she spent with Ben, the more she realized that her fears were rooted in the past, in the hurt she had experienced from others who had come before him. She had learned to be cautious with her heart, to withhold parts of herself that might make her vulnerable to someone who couldn't see beyond her surface. But Ben was different. His kindness was unpretentious, his presence comforting in a way she hadn't expected. He made her feel seen, not just for the woman she appeared to be, but for the person she was inside, the person who had dreams, desires, and a need for connection. Still, the fear lingered. Emily knew that trusting someone meant opening herself up to the possibility of being hurt again. And yet something in her told her that if she didn't take this chance with Ben, if she didn't allow herself to be vulnerable, she might miss out on something that could change her life. She had spent so long protecting herself, hiding behind walls of self-sufficiency and independence. But now she wondered if those walls had become a prison, keeping her from experiencing the very things she had longed for: real connection, love, and acceptance. As they spent more time together, Emily began to open up in ways she hadn't anticipated. She shared stories about her childhood, about the struggles she had faced growing up, and the dreams that had kept her going when everything else seemed uncertain. She talked about her mother, who had always encouraged her artistic pursuits despite the financial hardships they had endured. And with each word, each shared memory, she could feel herself letting go of the fear that had kept her from truly connecting with anyone. Ben listened intently, never interrupting, never judging. His eyes softened as she spoke, and in that moment, Emily realized that this was what she had been waiting for: someone who could listen, truly listen, without trying to fix her or offer empty platitudes. But as much as Ben made her feel safe, as much as he offered her understanding, Emily couldn't escape the nagging doubt that had settled deep within her. She had grown attached to him, yes, but she still didn't fully understand him. There were pieces of his life that he hadn't shared, parts of himself that seemed guarded. Despite his kindness, despite the way he had treated her with respect, She couldn't help but wonder, what was he hiding? Was there a part of him that was just as afraid to be vulnerable as she was? Or was there something more beneath the surface that he hadn't yet revealed? She had seen glimpses of the man he was, the one who had achieved so much, who had wealth and status. But Emily knew that beneath it all there was something deeper, something she needed to understand before she could fully trust him. One evening, after another long conversation about their lives, their dreams, and their hopes for the future, Emily finally decided to ask the question that had been lingering in her mind. She had to know if she could trust him, if he was willing to share himself with her as fully as she had been willing to open up to him. "Ben," she began, her voice soft but steady. "I've been thinking a lot about us, about this connection we have. And I have to ask, what are you really looking for? What's important to you in all of this?" Ben's expression shifted, and for a moment he didn't speak. He seemed to be considering her question carefully, as though weighing his words. Finally, he looked at her, his gaze intense but vulnerable. "I guess I'm looking for something that's real," he said slowly. "Something genuine, not based on what I can give, not based on my status or my career. I want someone who sees me for who I am, not for what I have. And with you, Emily, I feel like that's what's happening. I feel like you see me, truly. See me. And not just the version of me that everyone else sees. And that's something I don't want to lose." His words hit Emily harder than she had expected. For a moment, she simply stared at him, trying to process what he had said. She had always feared that people would only see her for the things she lacked, the things she couldn't provide. But with Ben, it felt like he had seen her for who she was, the person she had always wanted to be, beyond the surface of her struggles and imperfections. And in that moment, she realized that maybe, just maybe, she could trust him. Maybe she could let go of the fear that had kept her from fully embracing this connection. "I'm scared, Ben," Emily admitted, her voice trembling slightly. "I'm scared of trusting someone again. I've been hurt before, and it's hard for me to believe that things can be different. But I want to believe in this. I want to believe in us." Ben reached out, gently taking her hand in his. "Emily, I understand. I'm scared too. But I promise you, I'm not going anywhere. I want this to be real. And I want to take this slow, to give you the time and space you need. You don't have to be afraid of me." His words, his sincerity were exactly what Emily needed to hear. She had spent so long protecting herself, building walls around her heart, and yet now in Ben's presence, she felt something shifting inside her. She felt the possibility of love, not as something to fear, but as something worth embracing. She realized that love wasn't about perfection. It was about two people willing to face their fears together, willing to be vulnerable and open, in a way that made them stronger. With a deep breath, Emily looked at Ben, a sense of clarity washing over her. "Okay," she said softly, her voice filled with quiet determination. "I'm ready. I'm ready to take the next step." And in that moment, Emily knew that no matter what the future held, she was no longer afraid of what might come. She was ready to step into the unknown, to trust, to love, and to embrace the possibility of something real. Because sometimes the greatest moments in life come when we allow ourselves to be vulnerable, when we let go of the fear that has held us back for so long, and when we trust that love is worth the leap. In the journey of life, we often face moments that challenge us to step out of our comfort zones, to trust and be vulnerable, even when the fear of hurt or disappointment looms large. The story of Emily and Ben teaches us the power of embracing vulnerability and the beauty that lies in authentic connections. It's a reminder that love isn't built on perfection or a flawless image, but on the willingness to be real, to show up as we are, and to take risks despite the uncertainties. Emily's struggle with self-reliance and Ben's fear of being judged by his wealth illustrate the complexities of modern relationships. We often feel the need to hide parts of ourselves, thinking we must be something we're not to be accepted. But as the story unfolds, we learn that true connections are formed when we drop the masks and allow ourselves to be seen for who we really are. It's about letting go of the fear of being hurt and trusting that the right person will love you for all that you are, imperfections and all. This tale encourages us to believe in the possibility of second chances, to trust in the power of honesty, and to approach relationships with an open heart. It teaches us that sometimes the best moments in life come from unexpected beginnings. And it's in those moments that we find the courage to move forward. If this story has touched your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Your support inspires us to keep bringing you more heartfelt, emotional stories that will touch your soul. We can't wait to share more uplifting content with you in the future. Thank you for being part of this journey.